Helping Seniors Television, all about improving quality of life for seniors. If you're a senior, know a senior, or plan to be a senior, then this show is for you. It's all about helping you develop your own aging plan so you can age actively and with dignity. Helping Seniors Television from the Helping Seniors Network of information, education, and resources.
I'm Kerry Fink with Helping Seniors. Welcome to today's program of Helping Seniors Television. On behalf of our president and founder, Joe Steckler, I want to thank you for making the time to find this TV program. And by the very definition that you're finding this program, I want to welcome you to Florida, because our topic today is actually, what if you're new to Florida? And what does that mean in terms of your elder law documents? And so to cover this whole topic, and to recognize the fact that people are just moving to Florida right, left, north, and south, we thought it'd be really good to sit down with an expert who can help guide us on this. And that expert is a longtime friend of the Helping Seniors Network. His name is Greg Schwendeman. He's an elder law attorney with the firm of Rhodes Law, PA. Hello, Greg. How are you?
How are you?
So, you know, this was an interesting topic because let's say people who move into Florida come in a couple of varieties, okay? Number one, we're talking about elder law varieties, okay? So number one, these are people who need to do planning.
Yes.
That's a whole discussion, and there are a lot of great resources on the Helping Seniors of Brevard.org page to help lead you through. In fact, you and I did a program recently that was really hitting this. What do I need an elder law attorney for? And you lay out some of the things and why it's really not a good idea to just go out and try to create your own documents on the internet or something like that. But let's suppose that you were responsible. Maybe you lived up north, maybe you lived in the Midwest, maybe you were out on the West Coast and you said, I don't know, I want to enjoy Florida sunshine and I want to make my home in Florida. And maybe you had a really good law firm up north or wherever you come from that helped you put together a package, much like you do for families here. But now you've arrived in Florida. Florida is now your permanent home. Do we know if those documents work? How do you begin, like somebody rolls in your office and say, I just got here from Chicago, we're retiring to Florida, does what I have help?
Well, what we do is invite them in, and we want to review the documents because I'm not licensed in Illinois. And every state has different criteria, different statutes, different laws that affect what we call the advance directives and your last will and testament and trusts. So we want to make sure that if you're moving here and you're going to live here in Florida, we want to make sure that you're protected now while you're alive and you can make your own choices, as well as we are all going to pass away at some time. And the thing you have to remember is once we die, obviously we cannot make another decision, right? So we want to have that done beforehand. And frequently we will see someone who has documents from another state and it gets to the point either through incapacity or through death that they can no longer make that decision. So then we're dealing with these documents that may be worthless. So we want to make sure that your Florida documents are up to date and in conformity with the laws.
You know, you mentioned, we've talked about this before, we've talked about the fact that Florida has some pretty unique rules. In fact, in a previous program you and I did, you talked about the fact how the Florida legislature first changed some rules and then changed them again to try to improve on the process as it relates to a power of attorney. So if I come to you and maybe I lived in New York State and I said, well, here's my power of attorney, my understanding is the courts are going to try to work with it, but there's a lot of limitations because Florida requires such strict definitions in certain areas. Am I saying that right?
Yes, the legislature, their statute, for example, for the power of attorney is so detailed, and that's to protect you. Because you've got to remember, a power of attorney is a very, very powerful tool. You're giving someone else the ability to do anything with your property. Okay, so they want to make sure that your power of attorney is there to protect you. So if you are from another state, what we want to do is make sure that, yes, number one, it will protect you. Number two, it'll be able to effectuate what you want to have happen? And if so, will the banks, the healthcare, whomever is going to be looking at this power of attorney, will they be able to work with it? Now, I can't give a guarantee. As I always tell my clients, if a lawyer ever gives you a guarantee, get a new lawyer. But that said, we will work with you. We'll look at your documents, and if they're from out of state or if they're out of date, then we'll help draft new ones for you.
Right, because we've had this conversation several times that the worst time to find out your document doesn't work is when there's no chance to do a do-over. So you may be in a hospital bed and somebody's going to have to run around and do banking on your behalf. What a terrible time to find out that your document that you brought from another state isn't going to help you, or at least not immediately.
Yeah, and that's really when we get the calls in the middle of the night. People are panicking because a loved one is in that condition, and it's usually too late at that point. Once in a blue moon, we can get to them in a hospital and have them sign documents in the hospital. But that is very iffy because you've got to make sure the person has capacity. If they don't have capacity, you're out of luck.
Yeah, and it's not only left there on the financial documents. You broke it out real well in another TV program where you said there's like 3 aspects of somebody's life. You have the legal, you said you have the financial, and then you have the medical. But let's talk about the medical. Suppose that you now here in Florida and you need a certain level of medical care. And so I guess you're going to look at your health care surrogate form and things like that. Now, those probably are more helpful if they're familiar with Florida laws than if you roll down here with one that you had done in the state of Indiana or something.
That's true. You know, the local healthcare providers may not recognize, again, I won't give a guarantee, but if you provide them with legal documents from another state, they may not recognize them. And then you're stuck with your family not getting the information that they need and want. You're also stuck with decisions not being made.
Right.
So that's a very frightening position. Imagine being, laying there when, and I'm thinking of a particular case we had where the person could not communicate whatsoever, needed a surgery, and the family could not give the thumbs up because they did not have the healthcare surrogate.
Wow. That can become, so that's one of the things that I really get an appreciation for is a lot of times you find yourself in the middle of some very, very dire, difficult, complicated situations which could have been mitigated, or, as serious as the condition is, it's made worse by the fact that we don't have the right paperwork to help us navigate that situation.
Right. And if you think about a healthcare surrogate and living will, what does that do? A healthcare surrogate is you are making, and you're probably tired of me using this phrase, but choice. I want everybody to have their own choice. And so you, with a healthcare surrogate, are making your own choice as to who you trust to make the healthcare decisions for you and receive medical information about you when you can't do that. That's a very personal, very important part of our lives. So I want people to make that decision. And then the living will aspect is you're telling the people, okay, if I can't speak for myself, here's my wishes. I want to either be kept alive with machines as long as possible, whereas other people say, no, I don't want machines at all. But whatever it is, it's your choice. So we want you to be able to carry out your choice and the people you choose to help you carry that out.
Yeah, and another problem that I think is here, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but if we take the ostrich with our head in the sand kind of approach to this and just say, oh, my wife is going to handle that, we assume that, the doctors are going to go speak to the wife and say, well, here's where we're at, what do you want to do, or whatever. But let's suppose the people aren't married and there's not a legal connection, then how does that work? Doesn't that make it pretty dicey by the time you get to the hospital?
Makes it very dicey because you need something written in paper showing who that is. And I'll tell you, there's an important aspect when I talk to my clients. I always want to know, okay, who's next in line?
Right.
Because you mentioned the wife. What if husband and wife are in the same serious car accident? And both of them are now incapacitated. It's very important to think not only of the first line defense, but who is bringing up the rear guard in case the two of you are incapacitated.
And then, as we've had a conversation before, when we find a blended family where people have come together and there was previous marriages and things like that, then it gets really confusing in this soup if it's not straight, if it's not clear in a written document.
Right, and it needs to be written down very clearly. So number one, the doctors in a time-sensitive situation are getting the answers from the person that they need to get the answers from. That's part of it. The other part is, unfortunately, you will see in the worst periods of time, whether someone's dying, has died, or they're sick in the hospital, many times that is when the families, whether they're blended or natural, if you will, that's when you see the worst in human behavior.
It's the stressful time.
It's very stressful, and I'm an only child, so I can't relate to this, but it amazes me how many siblings truly can't stand each other.
Wow.
And what happens is that hatred that they have for each other impacts not them, it impacts mom and dad that they're fighting over.
Yeah.
It impacts mom and dad's finances because sometimes those finances have to pay for these two to fight.
Oh, wow.
So the best thing the parents can do, because they think, oh, my children love each other, they're going to help me. No, put it down in writing.
Yeah.
We'll help both of them understand.
That is so important. And there's another thing I was thinking about. We were talking before the camera was rolling, like, let's suppose that you put some documents together and the person that you name to help you, maybe they didn't move to Florida. Maybe they're still in New York State or something. And you said even that can create complexities because they may not be approved to manage certain situations because they're not a Florida resident.
Right. For example, if a will is executed with all the formalities that New York requires, Florida should recognize that will. That doesn't mean Florida will recognize the contents of the will.
Wow.
So, for example, we had this where it was out of state, and the person, the decedent, chose one of their best friends as the personal representative or executor. The problem was that person lived in Colorado and was a friend, not a blood relative.
Wow.
So they could not be the personal representative. So you have those kinds of issues, which is another good reason to have your documents looked over. And what I would say is when you're drafting a will, a power of attorney, healthcare surrogate, any of these documents we're talking about today, just as you alluded to, it's good to have a hurricane plan. But what do you have to do in a hurricane plan? You have to make sure you have flashlights, right?
Right.
You can't just put them in the box and forget about them until the hurricane comes, because that might be in a few years. You got to check those flashlights every year to make sure the batteries are still good.
Right.
Same thing with your legal documents. You need to have your legal documents, first of all, have them properly drafted. Then every year or two, just review them to make sure there's been no changes in family. Did the person you named to take care of you, did they accidentally die before you?
Wow.
Or did the legislature make a change in the law that changes your documents? So it's very good to check the batteries in that flashlight. Make sure your documents are good.
We were talking about that as sort of welcome to Florida. Yeah, we understand, those of us who live in Florida, we do understand a hurricane plan. And I use that as an analogy an awful lot, Greg, like talking to people about why you need an aging plan. Just because you have a hurricane plan does not mean you wish a hurricane is going to land here. In fact, it means almost the opposite, right? You do not want the hurricane here, but my goodness, you're going to be as prepared as you can be because you've thought these issues through. So preparedness is the key. And that's the same thing as it comes down to this idea of an aging plan. So when you take the time and you sit down and you bring the paperwork that you do have in, say, well, I know this was drafted in California, but I want to make sure it's okay now that I'm here in Florida. I want to be sure. That's just being wise in terms of executing your aging plan to make sure the document is going to stand that test when it was stress test. Isn't that what they call it? Like, yes, for the banks, they say, let's put a stress test on it, make sure it can handle this. And that's really what we do when we sit down with you and bring an out-of-state document and say, is this going to run through the stress test okay? Or is there a deficiency that we better figure out now?
Right, exactly. You want to do it now. Time waits for nobody, I think, is the old quote. And you want to make these decisions now, because not only are they your decisions, your choices, but your choices impact your whole family. So you have to make these decisions now while you have the capacity. It's very important. You
know, I remember going through a situation where someone had a will that was drawn in another state, and then when they passed on, that will was coming down to Florida because that's where the person was, but it had to go then into probate. And there was a thing that they had to, I think they called it proving the will, to make sure it was that person's will. And so in this particular case, the attorneys who drew the will were still there and in business, you know, in the person the state was from. But I imagine that's another challenge when you're bringing in out-of-state documents.
That's correct. For example, Florida does not recognize what we would call in layman's terms a handwritten will.
Okay.
Or the deathbed oral will, where you just tell the people, I leave everything to so-and-so. Florida doesn't recognize that.
Wow.
A will, we have certain requirements for that. And if they're out of state, and again, I'm not licensed in those other states, so I'm not going to talk about it, but I am going to say that you can, and I have seen, like you, I have seen these issues pop up, and again, it's too late at that point. And you also have to think about what is in the will, whether it is from another state or, as you mentioned, from an office supply store. How are you giving your property away and to whom? And how does that negatively impact your family? If you give a special devise, and maybe you spent all your money by the time you died, then your family may not receive what they're supposed to.
Right. And then another thing, and again, I'm just spitballing things out here, but I have come to understand that in Florida, we get some unique protections on our homestead.
Yes.
And in particular, if there's like a lot of other bills, medical bills and things like that, that crop up, doesn't it make sense again to have all that factored in, because maybe those protections didn't exist in the state where you first were coming from?
That's true. They may not exist wherever you're, I'm just picking a name, New York or Pennsylvania may not exist in that state where you had the will drawn. Or if you did the office supply thing and did it yourself, you could really damage the protections that are otherwise afforded you. Yeah. You could break them, and then your family is left to the possible claims of creditors. So you want to make sure that everything is set up properly.
So if we kind of rewind a moment and say, okay, I'm new to Florida, and you know, my goodness, the Florida population is growing right and left. If you're new to Brevard County, I always like to share the statistics because it's such an interesting county and an interesting dynamic. I learned earlier today that they say the average percentage of population in the United States over the age of 65 is somewhere around 16.5%. Well, here in Brevard County, I will say it's literally 1 in 4 people that you run into in Brevard County is over the age of 65. In other words, 25% of our population, well ahead of the national average, is over 65. And in Brevard County, if you just want to use what AARP does, they send you a membership card on your 50th birthday. Well, that's 1 in 2 people in the county. So we are a very senior-focused county. But the point that I wanted to kind of come back to is, now if you're coming into Florida, you're new to it, you have documents, maybe you got them on your own, maybe you had a good attorney wherever the state you came from. That's not necessarily going to guarantee that you're set the way you want to be set. And I remember, it's a funny line, you know, people joke about it, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. And people always snicker at that because the government has a plan for your assets, right? I mean, if you don't have one, they have one. It just may not be the plan that you wanted.
Right, and it comes down not only to assets, but to you personally.
Yeah.
The government has a plan for you.
Yeah.
That's why I keep telling everybody it's so important for you to make your own choices. If you don't have a last will and testament, like you said, then you follow the statute. They have a plan for you. If you do not have a power of attorney, healthcare surrogate and living will, and a pre-need designation for a guardian, and you become incapacitated, anybody could petition for guardianship for you. And
Wow.
someone you may not care for, someone you may not know, could be the guardian of your person and property and basically controlling everything about you.
Yeah, it's a little scary when you think about it. And all of this can be avoided by just taking the time to sit down and do some of this ahead of time. So let's go back to this. You're new to the state. Maybe you come with whatever you have. What do you advise somebody if they call the office and say, okay, I just landed here, I'm in Florida, but I spent most of my working life in Illinois. What do I do next? What do you tell them?
Well, what we do is set up an appointment for them to come in. And if they're at that stage of everything, we want to meet with them. We want to review their documents. As I said before, sometimes people don't know what to ask. Well, we'll ask you the questions. We'll lead you in the conversation. We'll find out what is your situation in life. How does client A differ from client B? Not everybody's the same. So we'll help guide you in that. And then we will help draft the documents that you need to protect your life and your everything you've built up over your life.
Yeah.
So.
And as we've talked in many previous programs, the challenge is you need these documents to be right the moment you need them. It's like a high stress moment. You need these documents to do what you had in mind. Let me ask another question, which might actually springboard into a whole nother show at a certain point.
Sure.
But what about those people that are, because here in Florida, we talk a lot about snowbirds. They're up north, but they're down here. They're going to spend their summertime back in Michigan because that's where they friends and family are for, but they really like to come south and enjoy the winters.
Right.
What is your advice for people who are kind of like in two places? I mean, do you sit down and talk with them and say, let's look at your situation, whether, because...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, everybody's different. Some people are, when they do the snowbird thing, they're spending more time, let's say, up north because perhaps they're still working or they may have property interests up there. So their life is different than someone who is completely retired, for example, and can spend a little more time here. Compared to those states up north, I would recommend to them that they consider making Florida their homestead state. Because whether it comes to the personal residence and our homestead protections there, or the lack of personal income tax, Florida offers so many advantages that many of the other states simply can't compete with Florida.
Yeah.
They cannot compete with Florida on a wide variety of levels. So I would say if you can, make your decision to make Florida your home state, and then come in, we'll draft all of these documents to effectuate that.
And that's a good point, because I think, especially if you are spending half your time in one location and the other, is it still the rule that it's 6 months and a day or something? I try to remember how they define it or how you make the election, hey, I'm a Florida person.
Yeah, and that's why I say it really comes down to talking to the client and seeing, because each one of them has a different background and a different need. Some people need to be up north a little bit more than they need to be in Florida, and others are vice versa. So it comes down by a case-by-case, client-by-client basis.
So we're talking with Greg Schwendeman, who is attorney with the law office. It's Rhodes Law, PA. And let me ask this question, because I know you guys are serious about doing a lot of education seminars and things like that. So another way to get a little bit more insight into all things elder law is to look for one of the seminars that you guys are very free with your time and make available in the community. How do people find out about that? Or maybe they just want to call and make an appointment and say, hey, you've convinced me. I need to have you take a look at what I got and see if it's what I'm thinking I got.
Sure, we'd be happy to. The easiest way to contact us is to call us at 321-610-4542, or you can go to our website, which is rhodeslawpa.com. And we do give seminars at One Senior Place, and those seminars are free. And I'm not sure of the schedule, but we even have different events where we have movie and popcorn and ice cream at One Senior Place, and either before or after that, we'll be free to answer any questions you might have. So we try to give a lot back by educating for free.
Well, and you guys, as part of the Helping Seniors Network, I know Ruth Rhodes serves on the board of directors with the Helping Seniors organization, and that's one of the things that's so important. When Joe Steckler founded this organization in 2011, he really wanted to create a resource that was going to help seniors navigate all these things, because all too often, a circumstance will shift something dramatically, and if you don't have a plan for it, then you're going to be kind of like a ship tossed around on the waves. But if you can sort of get a strategy in mind of how and where you want to go, it's going to make the ride a whole lot smoother. And so, Greg, one more time before we close out, I want to make sure we give that number. And also, you guys have a good website. There's a lot of good resources there. I believe it's RhodesLawPA.com.
That's correct.
Okay.
RhodesLawPA.com. And our number is 321-610-4542. And hopefully, like you said, that'll make for a smooth ride. And by the way, I wanted to thank you for letting me help you guys at the Cars and Coffee and selling some tickets for the benefits.
We appreciate that. You know, as a nonprofit, it's the only way we can keep going is through these fundraisers and things like that. And thank you, viewer, for joining us and supporting us. If you want to make a donation to Helping Seniors, get involved in some of our fundraisers. You'll find out all about it, helpingseniorsofbrevard.org. So, Greg Schwendeman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Rhodes Law, PA, and thank you, viewer, for tuning in on today's edition of Helping Seniors TV. On behalf of Joe Steckler, our president and founder, and our whole Helping Seniors team, we'll see you next time.
I'm Joe Steckler. Thank you for joining our program today. I'd like to remind you that our senior information line is available to you at 321-473-7770. There you can get help and direction that could be helpful for your specific situation or circumstances. The work of helping seniors is very important, but we can't do it alone. That is why our sponsors here in Brevard County are so important. I'd like to thank our many area sponsors, businesses, and medical providers who support the mission of helping seniors that help us carry the cost of our media efforts. If you'd like to join us either as a business partner or simply donate as an individual, we welcome your call at 321-473-7770. You are always welcome to visit our website at www.helpingseniorsofbrevard.org. Thanks so much for your help. It does make a difference.